Cain's sons are the first builders. They eventually build. It's Cain's descendants that build the Tower of Babel. It's Cain's descendants, the descendants of the bitter spirit of Cain, who are the builders who attempt to supplant the divine with technology, right? And they do that as a consequence of their intellectual pride in their technological pretensions. And if you don't think we've been building towers of Babel recently, of a gigantic size unparalleled in human history, you haven't been paying attention. And if you haven't noticed that it's the engineers who are doing it, you also haven't been paying attention. And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Enoch, and he built a city and called the name of the city after the name of his son Enoch. There's nothing wrong with technology except when its pretensions are to supplant the divine order. How are we doing that now? Well, how about pornography? How about the fact that we've taken a single woman and transformed her into 1 million images of women that can invade every corner of every house in the world and supplant the divine order? How about we're trying to do the same thing with robots, female robots even, sex robots even? More children of Cain. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all such as handle the harp and the organ. The technological society has its dawn in the children of Cain. Tubal-Cain, grandson of Cain, instructor of every artificer in brass and iron. He's the first person who makes weapons of war. And so what does that mean? It means the true cause of the terrible genocidal battles that plague humanity is their origin in the resentful spirit of Cain, brought about by his refusal to make the proper sacrifices. Right? So there's a notion in this story that the consequence of that individual sin, and this is a terrible thing to think about in your own life, it's terrible, multiplies as it extends itself across the generations and across the broader social community. That the sin of Cain is not isolated to the effects on his own soul, right? That the descendants of that spirit are the perpetrators of genocidal murder. Hitler was bitter. Stalin was bitter. Mao was bitter. And what was the consequence of that? What was the consequence of that bitterness spreading across the totalitarian landscape? The provision of opportunity for people who were sons of Cain to wreak havoc on the innocent people in the prison camps who are under their dominion. How about that for an ugly story? And what does that mean psychologically? Here's what it means. This is a horrifying thing, I think. There's a direct link between your refusal to make the highest of sacrifices and the probability that society will deteriorate in a murderous and genocidal direction. It's that close together. Way closer than you think. Merely, if for no other reason than merely because your failure to make the light within you shine as brightly as it possibly can disheartens you and others and turns them against the cosmic order. As you all know, the technological spirit. We'll close with this. Another one of Cain's descendants, Lamech. I have slain a man to my wounding and a young man to my hurt. Cain's descendants are literally murderous, but they're murderous in a manner that multiplies. So Lamech says, if you hurt me, 7 people will suffer as a consequence. Cain says that. And Lamech says, it'll be 70 and 7. Is that desire for revenge manifested in the social order multiplies exponentially, right? And if you're ever asking yourself, because this is a good question, it's like, why do things go so dreadfully wrong? You can look at other people and you can say, well, what did they do that they shouldn't have done? Or what did they fail to do that they should have done? And you can point fingers. And you can understand that there are times where justice itself requires the identification of transgressors, but there's a more fundamental issue at stake here, which is, what is it that you're bringing to bear on the situation or failing to bring to bear? And that's the fundamental question of conscience. Because you could say that if everything around you isn't proceeding in the optimal possible manner, then your shortcomings are linked to that failure in some way that you have yet to become conscious of. And that's a terrible thing. It's a terrible thing to contemplate, but it's an amazing thing to wonder, because it does mean that just as there's more resting on your shoulders on the side of sin than you think, there's way more available to you on the side of opportunity than you could possibly dream of. And that willingness to own the malformed aim, that's no different than learning to take advantage of the opportunity. And I would say, just as the abyss that lies underneath all of us is infinite in its depth, the opportunity that lies at our hands is infinite in its scope. And the proper sacrificial attitude brings you away from the abyss and moves you towards the realm of infinite opportunity. That's the kingdom of God that's spread upon the earth that men do not see or will not see.